Welcome back to Previously Prohibited. I'm Jenin Eunice here with my co-host Melissa Whitty, and we have some updates. Of course, it's been a crazy week. We actually have, I think, had a longer break than we usually do. Just so much going on in our lives, but we'll be back in less time, we promise, than has lapsed. But a lot has happened. One of the big pieces of news is the release of the JFK files. I think happened early last week. So, and I believe Mel might correct me on this, but about 66,000 pages that had not been released before. So we're going to be discussing that. And then the latest on Trump's crackdowns on free speech, especially in the context of non-citizens. So over to you, Mel.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. If you could, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave us a comment if you would. I know it's been a little while, so you could tell us that you missed us, because we certainly missed you, even though we saw you on Twitter. So, yeah, so the JFK files got released last Tuesday night, I believe it was, and it was a big dump. It was much bigger. Initially, I believe that there were... I think they thought there were about 20,000 when Trump first came into office, 20,000 documents. And then, like, lo and behold, the FBI is like, oh, hey, we found 60,000 more documents in a storage unit somewhere. They did that about a month ago, and those were all getting cleared. And then we got this dump, 66,000. Actually, I think it was not quite. I think it was 50,000 and then 16,000 the next day. So it's a lot of stuff to comb through.
Is that pages or documents?
It's so it's each one is a page. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, but then they are categorized in I believe, it's 66,000.
Sometimes when we get Discovery, it's unclear. So I'll be like, I have to go through 20,000 pages, and then it's like 20,000 documents, and some of those are 10 pages. So it's like a lot more.
Yeah. I'm fairly certain it's 66,000 pages. I wrote like a thread back when Trump first announced that he was going to do the release, and I found the five most anticipated redactions, right? And so that was really what I focused on when I started going down, writing out my thread that I'm doing to update that thread to see what actually got released. So but every single paper is marked with a document number on it, and then those are in fact attached to each one was like a document setting. So I think there were 22 that I saw pages of files, and then however many. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just 66,000 pages. Okay. Regardless, each one is marked with a file number, and it actually does make it easy if you're just going back to look for redactions, because you can just go and look for that new one, right? And you already know the number. And so that's what I did. I went through, and the first one, the big one that everybody kind of wanted to know about, was this redaction out of this 1961 memo from Arthur Schlesinger. But back up real quick. Yeah. I just
Why
want
don't
to give
we
everybody
briefly give a little background. What happened, and for people who are less familiar with this issue, why is the question of who killed JFK still interesting, and why is it still alive, and why is there a question as to what actually happened?
Right. Well, if you're Ben Shapiro, you actually don't think that this is interesting, and you don't care who killed JFK, which is like the most bizarre thing. If you guys don't know, that Ben Shapiro actually wrote a op-ed this week saying, it was titled, "Why do we care who killed JFK?" or "I don't care who killed JFK," right? And he's basically like, it was a lone gunman, and it happened 60 years ago, and I don't know why anybody cares about this anymore, which is
it's awkward when it's your favorite country, but we'll get to that later.
Exactly, right? Yeah. It's and so just to give people a little background, because before a couple years ago when I first started looking into this, I actually didn't know a lot about the assassination. I knew, obviously, Lee Harvey Oswald. I had seen the movie JFK. I knew everybody believes that there's a conspiracy, and in fact, there was a congressional committee in the mid-'70s that agreed that yes, there was a second shooter. So we know that there was a conspiracy. Everybody kind of admits to it.
And one of the big things too was Lee Harvey Oswald was the one who ostensibly killed JFK, or most likely at least was one of them. But he was heavily embedded. Well, he had a long history apparently with the CIA. Um,
So
so yeah, and then the
Lee
other
Harvey.
thing, and then he was assassinated by someone named Jack Ruby or Jacob Rubenstein, actually.
Right, right.
So nobody ever, got to hear his story.
Right. Lee Harvey Oswald joins the U.S. military when he's 17 years old. He kind of becomes disenchanted with it. He's stationed in Europe. This is a few years after the war. And he's in the military for 3 years, and then he gets out, and he decides he wants to he wants to defect to Russia. So he, at the time, was one of three Americans that quote unquote, that not quote unquote, but who defected to Russia. He went back to Europe. He came home to Texas, had about, I saw is in today's dollars, about $15,000 that he had saved up while he was in the military. And he's like, I want to go live in Russia. I want to be a communist, right? And this was like a really big deal at the time. So big that it was reported in local newspapers. And so he goes to Russia. He goes to the Russian embassy when he is in Germany. Actually, he goes to Germany. He goes to the Russian embassy. He says, I want to be a Russian. They let him in because it's good propaganda, obviously, for them. And he's there for about a year and a half. He meets his wife. He ends up marrying her. They have a child, and he's like, yeah, actually communism sucks and it's boring, and I'm making decent money, but there's nothing to do with the money. I want to come home. So he leaves. But the whole time that he's in Russia, he's getting these letters from his family and whatnot. We know that the CIA was monitoring him, right? We don't know if they were actually in contact with him while he was there, but when he comes back to the US, he is in contact with the CIA, and he has a lot of contacts still in Russia. He then becomes friends with people who are like, it gets very murky because he befriends people who are ardent anti-communists, right? And yet he still has contacts with the Soviets. So we know at one point he goes down to Mexico, and the CIA had all of the phones apparently tapped in Mexico, like every diplomatic phone that there was, they had them tapped. We learned that in the leak, or not in the leak, but in the document release. It was like every single phone in Mexico was tapped by the CIA, and they were listening because Russia was basically trying to, strengthen ties with Mexico. So anyways, so the kind of prevailing theory, most accepted theory, is that these were communist sympathizers who, well, I take that back. There are a couple of accepted theories. One is that he was a communist and he worked for the KGB or for the Soviets and to kill JFK. Another was that he actually worked with the anti-communists out of Cuba. So one of the big things, real quick, and I'm going to try not to bore you guys too much, but the Bay of Pigs was this event that happened very early, 3 months into John F. Kennedy's presidency, right? And so most people have heard of it, but they don't actually know what it was. Well, what happened was the Cuban Revolution happened with Fidel Castro in 1959, and when Castro came in, he overthrew the sitting dictator at the time, a guy named like Fidel Batista, and he nationalized pretty much every single business in Cuba at the time. So at the time there was a lot of gambling, a lot of casinos, a lot of prostitution, and sugar business and the oil business, right? So we have like 4 major things, and all of them are heavily involved and controlled by the mob, by the American mob, which is the half Italian, well, part Italian, but actually mostly Jewish mob at the time, right? And so Fidel Castro comes in and he nationalizes all of it. He takes it. And I found a document that said he had confiscated about $1.1 billion at the time, which in today's world is equal to about 12 billion, right? Wow. So it's a pretty big deal. I mean, these people were out a lot of money, and this was a very small group of people that owned all of this, right? So they were pissed. So they want to overthrow Castro basically to get their businesses back, to get their money back. And so they convinced the Eisenhower administration to let the CIA develop a covert operation to overthrow Castro, right? And this starts out, so the Cuban Revolution starts in 59, or it happens in 59. They start planning the overthrow of Castro in 60. JFK wins the election and he comes into office, and pretty much everything is in play, right? Then what happens is that when they brief JFK on their plan, he's like, I don't like this. I don't want any part of this. I don't want the US to be involved. And I'm afraid that the plan you guys have presented me with, there's a good chance we're going to get implicated, because it was all supposed to be covert, right? They had
Right.
about 1,500 Cuban exiled Cubans who were trying to get back in power, and so JFK is like, no, I don't like this. You got to come up with a new plan. So at the time, they were going to invade, like in this. Let me see real quick. I got the exact name of it. They were going to invade in this city, and it is called Trinidad. So it was actually Trinidad, and then I can pull it up real quick for you guys, because it's actually kind of interesting what happened, and you actually do understand why people maybe would like were pretty pissed about him. So let's see. Boom. So can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Trinidad right here, right? And there's some mountains that are right here. So the idea was basically we've got these mountain men up here. They're rebels. We're going to arm them. We're going to bring some guys in, and then they're going to go to Havana. But if they get stopped, they'll have mountains right here to retreat to, right? Okay, but the problem was that JFK basically was like, look, they're going to see us coming. They're going to know it's us. I don't like this. And so he demanded that they go back to the drawing board, because he didn't want to have to send anybody in. And so what did he do? All right. Okay, hold on. Sorry, guys. There we go. And is it one more? So here's Trinidad, where it was starting. This is called the Bay of Pigs right here. Well, it translates to Bay of Pigs. All right, so you can see it's a tiny little opening, right? And so they say that you guys are going to come in here. It's going to be much more covert, but it makes it much harder to I guess to detect. I don't know. I don't actually know all of the military things, but that was the big thing, was that he made them change from Trinidad to the Bay of Pigs to the entrance. Well, they weren't sneaky. They got caught going in. Now, the CIA knew that this was basically going to be like a turkey shoot. They knew it was a setup, but their thinking was, doesn't really matter. Once we're in, we'll roll him. We'll convince him to give us the air power that we need. And what happened was, when they got caught, as they knew that they would, JFK said, well, I'm actually not going to provide any of the air power. I told you I wasn't going to help, and I told you I wasn't going to get the U.S. implicated in any of this. And so all of those rebels got caught, and there were public executions, and it was basically seen as this giant betrayal, and this giant kind of, that he looked weak in the face of the communists, right? And so he was hated. I mean, I never realized how much of the country really, really hated JFK until I started looking at it. And when you start looking into his case, you see that there are all of these protests against him in the weeks and months before. And it's all from like these kind of far right John Birch Society people who are like, see him as essentially allowing communism to be ushered into the US, right? Because as like, think about how radical some people on the right are about, like, Islam and Sharia law, and then like multiply it by like 100. Okay.
Yeah.
These people were insane.
Yeah.
And I'm like reading it, and I don't know, it all resonates with me, because it's very America first, and it's like, this isn't our problem, and sorry you guys lost all your freaking, your prostitution money down there, but this isn't my problem. You probably shouldn't have been engaging.
correct me if
Yeah.
I'm wrong, so you know more about this, but he thought we shouldn't even have gotten involved in World War II, right?
Right.
So he
Yeah.
was
He
like
was.
very anti-war,
Yeah.
non-interventionist.
Yeah. The Kennedys were famously isolationists in the lead up to World War II. John John Kennedy was JFK's dad. Joseph Kennedy, excuse me.
Yeah.
He was a big alcohol runner during Prohibition. He made a ton of money during Prohibition. Bootlegging, and that's kind of where their fortune came from. He also kind of rigged some of the banks, but that's a whole separate thing.
And they were
But
Catholic, which was like kind of disfavored at the time, which is weird to think that now. But
it is, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's always kind of been a Protestant country, but yeah, there was a strong Catholic center up in the Northeast. Anyways, so he kind of had a lot of things going against him, kind of, I guess. It's weird because they were very anti-intervention, isolationist, hardcore, to the point where Joseph Kennedy actually went to the UK to lobby against Churchill, and basically was like, no, we need to, you guys need to make nice with Germany. You need to make nice with Hitler and be done with it. Do not drag us into this war. But then it's interesting because once we were dragged in, all of the sons served. And in fact, the oldest Kennedy boy was killed. He was a pilot in World War II, and he ended up dying. So certainly a great sacrifice for our country. Anyways, he comes back, and so JFK's kind of, I think, a little bitter about this, and they really want to restore this kind of isolationist mentality to the U.S., which, of course, speaks to my heart, certainly. And so he's trying to pull out everywhere he can. He's a big believer in the UN. He pushes, he starts the Peace Corps. They're peaceniks for the most part. And so it's interesting because for the most part, I am probably just like my politics align pretty well with the JFK, which wouldn't have necessarily been the case had I wouldn't have said that 10 years ago, probably, before looking into him.
Yeah.
So those are the reasons why. So you've got a couple reasons why people would want to kill him, right? Because obviously we've got fanatics who think he's a commie. You've got people pissed off because they lost a ton of money and they felt like he betrayed them, right? And so those are kind of like the revenge angles that people went for. And now I think there's pretty much two reasons that you could have. You could say people are seeking revenge, or people are trying to influence policy, right? And so the other side of the conspiracy coin is who wanted new policy, or who wanted policy maybe even to stay the same that he was pushing back against. And of course, then if you start looking at it from that angle, you come across Israel. And we know that at the time, again, JFK is a big peacenik. He doesn't like nuclear weapons. He's pushing for proliferation treaties. He is demanding compliance with these treaties. And Israel wants a bomb, and they will do anything to get the bomb. And so they start working with the CIA, and we know that. And that's another thing that came out in this document releases, is that basically James Angleton, who was at the time, he was in charge of the Israel agent, the CIA's Israel department. He was totally in charge, and he ran that as his own kind of kingdom. He didn't consult with anyone. He didn't report to anyone. He ran all of the U.S.'s intelligence relations with the state of Israel for like 15 years or something like that. And what came out in this testimony that he gave before the church committee is that you kind of get the idea that, yeah, he was actually trading U.S. nuclear secrets to Israel in exchange for information about the Soviets. He thought it was worth the trade.
And he had some connection to Lee Harvey Oswald, right? If I am remembering correctly.
So James
Angleton.
Angleton, yes. So before the CIA, there was this organization called the OSS. I can't actually remember what it stands for. Everybody just calls it OSS. But that was the intelligence agency during World War II. Prior to World War II, there actually wasn't an intelligence agency. Not certainly not a foreign one. You know, the FBI I think was formed in like the 20s, something like that. But anyways, and Angleton was in charge of the OSS's Italy department, right? So he's like embedded with the fascists there. And we were going with how he
The
knew.
relationship between Angleton and Lee Harvey Oswald. I thought I had recalled
Right.
there being something, but
Right. So what happens is that when he is embedded at in Italy before because once the OSS it splits into two and it becomes one department that goes under the State Department, and then the other part of it becomes the CIA. So he's already in Italy, he's already embedded with them, and so he just becomes like over the Italy chapter, and he's the one that starts regulating the mail. He starts reading the mail. Well, it's his guy, but it gets funneled through him, and because, like I said, Lee Harvey Oswald was one of just 3 defectors at the time. Of course, we were reading all of his mail that was coming through
right.
Italy. So it's kind of a lot. I know it's really dry and I know it's hard to follow.
No, it's not dry. So, and then you had mentioned, and I sort of cut you off earlier, Schlesinger, Schlesinger.
Right. So after the Bay of Pigs happens, right? And so it's just a shit show. It falls apart. So anyways, it's really bad because these guys who we were supposed to be backing, kind of, it's really dependent upon who you're asked how much support we were supposed to be giving them, but it was the CIA's plan. So yeah, we probably should have been backing them, or we shouldn't have sent them in to begin with, because the president was not on board to send in the air support that they needed, and they were just left out there like sitting ducks. So they get they get like perp walked. It's terribly embarrassing, and then some of them do get executed publicly, and it's really, really harsh. Anyways, so people are pissed, and now JFK is pissed because he finds out, of course, that the CIA knew that it wasn't going to work, the plan wasn't going to work, and they had set him up, and now he just has egg on his face, right? So he is like, F these guys, I'm done. I want to break up this entire organization. It has too much power. It is just this rabid dog, and I have no control. It's not accountable to anyone, because before, when you had the OSS, it was under the State Department. So there was like there was a direct chain of command there. And then what happens is there's actually no clear direction for the CIA. That's what we find out. And so he tells his friend, Arthur Schlesinger, who is a historian, but also one of his best friends. He pulls him in because he's like one of the only people that he can trust. And he demands or he asks him to give me your recommendations. What do you know? And what do you think can happen? So it's kind of it's a long memo, but something that was kind of fascinating was that about 3 pages of it were blocked out, right?
Okay.
And so that's always been like, okay, well, what was in this memo that was blacked out? And turns out it was actually not a whole lot. Well, it was and it wasn't. So that's where I'm like, I've been digging, right? It's just like, why? There's a reason why they kept these things secret all of these years. And you have to, because when you go through and you read it, you're like, okay, well, it's actually, he's basically talking about how outnumbered the intelligence agency for the State Department is to the CIA, and he's giving like basic like specific numbers, and it's like there's really no reason why they should keep this secret. So right now, that's basically what I'm doing, is I'm going through line by line and highlighting exactly what this is, what this means, and cross-referencing those numbers. I've been like digging through because I'm so just OCD. It turns out that the State Department actually has all of the memos, all of the minutes of all of the meetings that have ever taken place on these topics. They have them online for you to search. You can search line by line. So like Cuba policy, you go in every meeting that was held in 1961 and 1962 is in a volume, in a book that you can go read everything. So I'm just like going through, figuring out, because there's a reason why they kept these specific pages hidden, and it's not obvious when you first look at it. So that's where we're at.
I remember listening to a few months ago, I listened to a podcast. I can't remember who it was. I actually can't remember either the host or the guest, but I remember the guest was a Washington Post reporter who's an expert on this, and I forget his
Richard
name.
or Jeff Morley, I think it is.
Yeah, so he had said if we get the Schlesinger memo unredacted, like that will be something. If we don't
Right.
get that unredacted, then we'll know that this is a bullshit release.
Right. Yeah. And I actually paid for his Substack, and I haven't seen him post about that yet. So yeah, because that was the first thing. I was like, boom. That was the first thing.
Yeah.
And I've got it printed out right here. I'm like going through it line by line, and I'm like, I know there's something here, but
Yeah.
it's not clicking for me yet.
So
I don't know.
So what's your like? How would you sum up the sort of new information derived from these documents?
I mean, they're still withholding stuff. Like, I think most people will say, no, there's no smoking gun, right? You're never going to find, it's not like you're going to say, oh, here's the guy. We know who the guy is, right? But there's a reason that they're holding these files. There's a reason that they're redacted. And no, it's not because they're protecting anything. Everybody knows that the CIA was trying to kill people in the 60s.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that we did a lot of dirty shit. Okay. That is not what is being hidden. There are very specific things. So probably the most important thing in this recent release was, in fact, the James Angleton testimony, because you find out confirmation that yes, he was he was trading secrets with for Israel with them. He was trading nuclear secrets to them in exchange for Soviet secrets, because there were a lot of like Russian Jews who had defected to Israel, and so they still had a lot of contacts within the Soviet Union, so they knew that. It's an interesting, I read through pretty much the 119 pages of testimony, and he's so sly, he's so slick, he's just such a weasel, don't take this the wrong way, such a lawyer in such a way, like he knows, you can always tell when you're talking to a lawyer, because they know how to answer without answering.
Yeah. I'm not a real lawyer. I just play one on TV. I once I went on a date before I was with my husband with a guy who was like, "You seem too nice to be a lawyer." I don't really know. So I don't take it as an insult.
The lawyer I used to work for all the time, I'm like, "Don't lawyer me," when I would ask him a question, because he would be like, "Well, what do you mean?" And stop, just answer the damn question, all right? And he always kind of non-committal in the answers.
Yeah.
And so just drive you just batshit crazy. And then what's interesting is that he gets caught up, because there's one senator who's asking him questions, and he knows the game. He's like, no, I need you to answer this in a yes or no. Okay.
Yeah.
And then immediately he's like, can we go off the record, please? We need to take a break. We need to go off the record. So he goes off the record like 4 different times when he's getting asked this stuff. And so all of that came back unredacted, except I think one page, which I actually emailed someone on, because I can't tell if the page is just blank or they've just left it redacted. It's weird, because these are photocopies of things, and so there's lines on each side, and for whatever reason, this is kind of like in the middle of the testimony, and it's like on page like 60 or 69 or something like that, and it's about half of the page is still blocked out, like totally blocked out is what it looks like. I can't, or it could just be empty. I don't know. It's weird.
I mean, the other thing is we'll just never really know if we have everything. Like I recently watched a documentary about Charles Manson, and I've heard it's like, it dips into the sort of conspiracy theories a little. It seems like Charles Manson may have been a result of, what was it called, where they were giving it's just slipping my mind.
MK
Ultra, yeah, he had may have been like a victim of MK Ultra and kind of gone slightly insane, and but they claimed that like all the files from MK Ultra were burned in a fire or
Oh
something
no, they
like
were.
that. So,
They were.
yeah,
So oh yeah, yeah. No, no, no. So
but
so
that
that's
seems
very
like an unlikely accident, or am I
no,
too
no, no.
conspiratorial?
No, no,
They
no.
burned
If
them,
they
right? So
no,
on
they
purpose.
he admitted. So it
Yeah.
was Sidney Gottlieb. I've actually read an entire. It's
Yeah.
called Poisoner in Chief. It's by Stephen
Hmm.
Kinzer. It's a great book if you ever want to read about that. But no, Gottlieb admitted that he
Yeah.
ordered them all to be
Yeah.
destroyed, and so it was not an
So
accident. Yeah, here I'll
yeah,
show you
exactly. So if
guys.
they would do that, how do we know? They didn't do that
Right.
with like.
So here's
Oh,
the
okay. So
page that I was talking
yeah.
about, 59, and you can
Huh.
see. So,
Yeah.
but you can't see like the outline. But again, we've got lines right here. So I'm like,
Yeah.
is this still redacted or was this never redacted?
Interesting.
Yeah. So I emailed someone on that, and I haven't heard back from them. So who knows. But so yeah, you guys can see that. I will include that in my thread, which is still it should be up soon. It's just I wanted to get this all together and then present it in a way that people would be like, okay, well, why do I care?
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
should I
Yeah.
care? And I'm like, well, it actually it's pretty far reaching, because some people would say that, all right, well, if it was in fact a rogue foreign state who didn't like the fact that JFK was maybe clamping down on their their illicit, illegal, stolen nuclear weapons program, and they were willing to murder people over that, what kind of impact has that had on American foreign, American relations with said country all the way up until today? Because it sure does seem like all of our presidents are pretty subservient to that one nation, rogue
Yeah.
nation, and that might actually explain some things.
Well, that brings us to our next topic,
Yeah.
which is another way in which said country has maybe compromised some American values like free
Yeah.
speech. So there have been a number of developments in the last week on this front. For people who haven't kept track as closely, there are now several people who've been detained by ICE or threatened to be detained by ICE, or who've just fled the country because ICE was planning to detain them and put them in deportation proceedings for their speech, pro-Palestine speech. It's very clear at this point that nobody who's been targeted has actually done anything, has committed crimes. One of the people may have attended Nasrallah's funeral.
Yeah, that one's a little bit questionable. I think of all of
Yeah.
the cases.
Of all that, that's the one. Like the details around that are
It's
fuzzy, so I'm
yeah,
gonna leave that one out. I don't want to weigh in on that. I
yeah,
mean, I will say obviously there's some hypocrisy in that. Like, if Netanyahu had died and someone had attended his funeral, that would not be an
right,
issue, and he's an actual war criminal. But we'll leave that aside. But the other
right.
people here, it's fairly clear. Mahmoud Khalil, a woman named Yun Seo Chung, very sympathetic. She's 21 years old. She came from South Korea when she was 7. She's on a green card. She was valedictorian of her high school, had
Yeah,
amazing grades at Columbia her first semester or first year, and then had participated in pro-Palestine protests. Isn't even accused of like giving public speeches or talks or leading the protests or doing anything really. She was arrested recently, actually. But it was kind of part of the mass arrests that the NYPD does when there are large protests. They'll often just like arrest everybody and then
right.
let most people go. Or like, if anything, like it was a very, very minor violation, like nothing that would make you deportable under normal circumstances. So, again, these people are being charged under an immigration statute that allows the Secretary of State to deport anybody that he determines poses a threat to our foreign policy, essentially. It's pretty clear to me that the First Amendment, I think I went over this last time, but just for people who didn't listen, First Amendment says Congress shall not abridge the freedom of speech. It's a restraint on government. It's not about the speaker. This is completely at odds with the text of the Constitution, the First Amendment, with our tradition of free speech. The idea that people cannot attend pro-Palestine protests, participate them, or lead them, or talk on TV about it without having to fear that they'll be taken out of the country away from their pregnant wives and their parents is shocking.
Yeah.
And the latest one, this
This
woman,
one is the most egregious to
the
me.
most egregious. So she's a postdoc at Tufts University. She's here from Turkey on a visa. She was like, I watched the video of her detention. I'm sure you did too. It was like a bunch of guys in masks and hoods come up to her and like take her away.
Yeah.
Really like scary third world stuff. And apparently, all she did that we know of is
Yes.
sign on to an op-ed saying that Tufts should divest from Israel due to the genocide in Gaza.
Yep. Yep. I mean, it's so egregious what they are doing to this woman. I mean, to the point where I had somebody, and of course we've got these just absolute dumbasses who are again defending. To me, this is the indefensible, right? This is the op-ed that she wrote, she signed on to. Try again, President Kumar, renewing calls for Tufts to adopt the March 4 TCU Senate resolution, which was just a BDS resolution to look into the ways in which the university was using its endowment investments to fund the genocide in Gaza and try to make meaningful changes so that we could stop funding the genocide in Gaza, which I don't know, sounds like a pretty freaking reasonable request to
It
me.
does. Especially
Um,
since now they're threatening everybody in Gaza with extermination, basically, pretty openly. No
yeah.
supplies getting in, no food, so people are starving to death. In fact, a journalist I follow, Abdul, I forgot his name now. He was taken to the hospital with malnutrition recently. Glenn Greenwald had done a post on
Yeah.
him. He's very young. He might be like 15 or 16, but
Right.
incredibly brave guy. It's really horrible. There was some good news. Ms. Chung, the young Columbia student, the 21-year-old Columbia student I mentioned, a judge granted her request for basically temporary relief, and said that the government was to halt the deportation proceedings, that Ms. Chung didn't present any kind of security risk, that it didn't appear she had done anything to warrant this. And so that's good news. Hopefully more of that to come. But the administration is continuing to detain people, it seems, for their speech. So this is really, I mean, this is third world like dictator stuff,
Oh yeah, yeah. It's
like putting
so
people in detention for writing op-eds.
Yeah, it's so asinine, and
It's,
all of this is done under the guise that their mere presence in our country is harming our foreign policy, which is total BS. And I know, like, I feel like I've cussed a lot tonight, but there's just so much crap that it's so crazy that it's hard. I haven't had any sugar or gluten or dairy or alcohol in 22 days. And I'm telling you, it turns out that those are the things that keep me from wanting to murder people.
yeah, I
And
mean, I don't know how you do it without the alcohol. Like, so
yeah,
I need a
it's
glass of wine like every night, having to deal with this complete lunacy.
See, and for me, it's like it's cheese. Like I love string cheese. It's my absolute favorite thing in the whole world. And like when I'm stressing out, I just want to have a string cheese, and I can't right now. And so I am hating everyone. I'm like going off. I'm having to like totally do Twitter purges. Like I just can't. I have to leave my phone in the house and go on a walk because yeah, it's so
That's
crazy.
good.
There's no words, right? You just want to cuss.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
it's
and then
so
to like add to the crazy, this I've never seen anything like this before. A number of Jewish students or Jewish people, I think they're all students at Columbia, filed a lawsuit against Mahmoud Khalil, the guy who's in ICE detention for leading some of the pro-Palestine protests. Nurdin Kiswani, who's a pro-Palestine activist in New York, and a few other people I'm not familiar with, but seem to have engaged in the pro-Palestine protests. And their allegations are, so they're like suing them under anti-terrorism civil laws. I've never seen this before, like suing individuals.
yeah.
Normally these seem like it would be like this is sort of criminal like if people were engaged in terrorism, that's like DOJ territory, not individual civil lawsuits, but whatever.
Right.
So what they're trying to do is make the argument that these students are linked to Hamas, and their main proof for that comes from the fact that Students for Justice in Palestine at Columbia tweeted on October 6th, 2023, "We're back," like for the fall semester, and scheduled their first meeting. But the complaint says they just said, "We're back," which clearly meant they knew that October 7th was going to happen. So a bunch of students at Columbia knew that October 7th was going to happen because they're so embedded with Hamas. And I'm being sarcastic for people who can't pick up on this. Like, this is the most ridiculous claim.
Yeah, so I always say that my respect and that my commitment to free speech was forged in the fire of Westboro Baptist. All right. I live in a military town. I used to be an army wife. I have seen this firsthand. I have been at a funeral that was picketed by Westboro Baptist. Those people were horrendous. And you know what? The Supreme Court said that their speech was protected.
Yeah.
So if you can go and you can picket at the funeral of an American soldier who died and say, thank God for dead soldiers, your son deserved to die, then I'm sorry, these freaking kids at Columbia can suck it up. All
Well,
right,
that's why they're trying to do this smoke and mirrors thing and
with
claim
the
that they are
terrorism thing,
actually Hamas actors, which is like, I don't know, just ludicrous to me. I don't even know how to the idea that these people, I mean,
yeah,
there
because
could be a random person here or there, but that they're taking instructions from Hamas and that they're so the plaintiffs are arguing basically that they've suffered pain and suffering, or they've endured pain and suffering as a result of what happened on October 7th. And these students are responsible for it because they were effectively responsible for what happened on October 7th. And also their participation in the protest was like a daily reminder. And there's like one woman, one of the plaintiffs, the first one, actually, I feel bad. Her parents were kidnapped, seemed to horrible stuff. But I don't think these students were responsible for her suffering.
But she's not even at Columbia.
She's not?
No, from what I can tell, she's actually not even a student at Columbia.
Yeah, so I have to admit I got a little jumbled because I read the complaint kind of.
It is confusing because she is, I believe, a resident of New York State.
New York, okay.
But she is her parents like they're dual citizens and whatnot.
Yeah,
and they were kidnapped.
So I think that's why they've had a few plaintiffs to try out these different theories because they're all so ridiculous. So these students apparently, because they're embedded with Hamas, and that's sarcastic, are responsible for her pain and suffering. The others are like absolutely ludicrous. So a couple of them are dual citizens and chose to serve in the IDF or sign up for the reserve services or whatever, were deployed for Gaza. And it was so tough on them to kill Gazans and to, bulldoze people that they have suffered. And it's, of course, these students' fault because they're protesting at Columbia, the genocide. And one, your favorite, it wasn't even the person, the complainant wasn't even deployed to Gaza. It was her brother. And so she's claiming that her brother being deployed to Gaza, where he was killing Gazans, caused her pain and suffering. Like, I can't even, like, the level of narcissism at play here is just...
It's like generational trauma, but which I already think is just like, or kind of like inherited generational trauma is already kind of bullshit. And then you throw on that this actually isn't. This is just like, I don't know, third party PTSD kind of thing. And again, it's asinine.
And the whole point, of course, is to continue to pile on these people. Mahmoud Khalil, who's already got enough problems as it is. It's to add to this image of these students being like terrorists. They're not just college students protesting. And sometimes you say dumb things. I mean, I said lots of dumb things when I was 18 or 20. Like, that's what kids are supposed to do. But instead to try to paint the picture that these are like actual terrorist operatives on Columbia's campus, which I think is just absolutely absurd. And then also, of course, it's going to chill speech because normal people don't expect that they're going to like participate in like civil disobedience and then have random people file lawsuits blaming them for their pain and suffering. That's like completely ridiculous. And I'm sure this will ultimately be resolved against them. And hopefully the plaintiffs will have to pay for their attorney's fees because they should. But in the meantime, you have to get a lawyer. You have to go to court. You have to spend time defending this lawsuit. Like, it's a huge pain in the ass. Nobody wants to deal with that. So the whole point is, again, to try to contribute to the chilling. And here I'm like going to engage in some speculation that I wouldn't necessarily in writing, but I wonder, this extremist Jewish supremacist group, Beitar, which was harassing me for a while, they have left me alone. They usually only bother me when I've been tweeting about them. They left me alone, but then yesterday, after I'd been tweeting about how stupid this lawsuit was, they started calling again. And I had this thought go through my head that I wonder if they are in some way responsible for this lawsuit. I wonder if some of these lawyers are the Beitar people,
Yeah.
because they also have gone after Mahmoud Khalil. In fact, they claim that they're responsible for getting him detained. And they've gone after Nardine Kaswani. They've threatened her with death, basically handing her a pager. So there are like a lot of connections here to Beitar that make me wonder if this is, again, a Beitar driven thing. So hopefully the case will be dismissed. I hope they don't even have to answer the complaint because it's so utterly ridiculous.
Okay, so it's
yeah.
yeah. For some reason, I thought that it was farther along, but this just got filed.
No,
then,
it just got
right?
filed on Monday.
Okay, good.
The
Good.
24th.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, I know
Yeah, it's
when I was looking at, because I was like, how can they sue for emotional distress? Because I knew that the Westboro Baptist, that there had been a Gold Star family that sued Westboro,
Yeah.
and they lost, and it was actually kind of it was like an 8-1 decision, so it was pretty solid. There's no really overturning that, and I
Yeah.
believe it was actually written by Scalia. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I was,
Well, that's why they're doing this, trying to link it to
right. So then when I realized, I was like, okay, so that's why they're pushing.
Yeah.
So, and I actually had somebody in my mentions, but yeah, so the case law in that, it was like Snyder v. Phelps or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
That case, they said you cannot file civil tort. You can't file for emotional distress when people are protesting about public content or discourse, public discourse, things that are pertinent to the public discourse. Obviously,
And
this is war. This is U.S. support of war. It's not like
yeah.
it was a private matter that they're
Well,
like.
and exactly, and they weren't. I mean, the Westboro Baptist was more egregious too, in that they were showing up to the funerals of like these students.
Right.
The worst thing, they weren't going to the funerals of the plaintiff's parents and
Right.
protesting. They were protesting
Right.
on a college campus, like, which they're entitled to do.
Right. So somebody clearly had connections to Columbia. They were like, no, this case is different because Columbia is a private university, whereas the Westboro Baptist was a public. I'm like, I don't actually think that that's how that's going to fly.
That's absolutely. It's an utterly ridiculous theory. And it's possible that the judge, I mean, it depends on the judge they get. It's possible that a judge who is brainwashed enough on this topic might let it get past a motion to dismiss, might say, like, if so just to survive a motion to dismiss, the judge accepts as true all of the allegations in the complaint and says, if these are all true, then you have a claim that, a legally cognizable claim that you can move forward with. Then you have to actually prove the things in the complaint. And I think they're going to have a lot of trouble with that because so it's sort of it depends on how and judges look at things a little differently. Like, will the judge say, okay, they're just asserting these students are terrorists, like actually connected to Hamas. I'm going to accept that as true, and we'll see if they can prove it. Or is the judge going to say, well, actually, the evidence here, just saying we're back, obviously does not establish a link with Hamas. So I'm going to say that even if these allegations are true, you don't have a legally cognizable claim. Obviously, I would do the latter, but I could see a judge going either way, just depending on his or her sort of personality and biases. I don't want to say there's no way it could survive a motion to dismiss, but there's no way they're going to win at trial.
Yeah. It's something that's just kind of struck me yesterday is that I'm like, so let me get this straight. You guys don't think it's a coincidence. It's just a mere coincidence that these people happened to the day before October 7th, just, kind of reboot their Instagram page for the fall semester or whatnot, which is, they were about a month into the fall semester. So maybe that's a bit of a stretch. I don't know. Could have
I don't know. Were you a
like
college student? I was a college student, and I was also in Students for Justice in Palestine. It was more low key back then, but we were so lazy. We would definitely do things like, we would definitely like start up the semester like 3 weeks before it ended.
Yeah, so and I'm like, so that's not a coincidence. It's definitely a sign. But the sirens going down, the military not showing up for 6 hours, there being 27 breaches on the fence. None of that's a coincidence at all to you people.
Yeah.
That's I don't know, guys. I think that's a bit of a stretch here.
Yep.
That yesterday I was just like, you've got to be shitting me that you think that somehow the students at Columbia were coordinating with Hamas, and no one picked that up. No one at
Yep.
all. You know, apparently
Yep.
they were using carrier pigeons to transfer messages transcontinentally. Yet, you guys think that happened, but yet the IDF, Mossad, the CIA, you know, the GID, MI6, all of them, they all missed it. You
Yep.
know, somehow these messages got through.
It's absolutely ridiculous on every level. But anyway, well, it's been great to be back. I missed this.
I know, yeah.
And
Yes.
we have an exciting guest coming up next week, for sure. Maybe someone on Friday. That has not been confirmed yet, but we'll definitely be back with you in the next couple days, and I'm sure there'll be more horrible things happening in our world for us to go over with you guys. So thanks for listening, and thanks for watching.
When I crack the code on JFK, who killed him, I'm gonna let everybody know first here. All right, yeah, line by line.
That's where you're gonna get the.
Yeah, that's where the autism comes in handy. I'm like, no, it's like handy, but it's not. I have a whole stack of paper right here, guys. And people are like, where's your thread? And I'm like, you don't understand. When I immerse myself in this stuff, sometimes I drive myself insane. I become so focused on all of the details that I can't like pull myself out to like make it to where it's, you know, people actually want to read it without going to sleep, you know? So...
No, it was very interesting. I'm sure all of our audience will agree that that's the case. So, see you guys soon.
All right, bye guys.